I'm very glad to participate in this workshop. Um, the topic is a bit different than a very interesting issue about populism. I think this is a #1 issue now in the world with regard to politics. But there's also one important issue here, not only for the COVID pandemic, which is in the focus of our research, but also generally it is actually the freedom of information and accessibility of public information to society, especially to journalists, which is basically always an issue for discussion and not very likable by politicians, which we'll see a little bit later. So in the last decades, the right of citizens and journalists to request information held by public authorities has been gradually supplemented with the open data, with the obligation of government to provide the society, especially media and NGOs and researchers, with the machine-readable data, which is basically most of it available in real time and updated in real time, in order to produce research, stories, applications, etc. So my general point here in this presentation is that despite all negativity and the challenges posed by the pandemic and the crisis we are still facing, actually, it had really one important benefit, and this is facilitation of the access to information and more open data which is available to the public. So just to introduce you a bit with this issue is I'm showing you here. Basically, I'm asking you, do you know why Tony Blair thinks he was an idiot? So in his memoirs, he said that the worst decision he made while he was a prime minister was that he proposed and the parliament adopted the Freedom of Information Act. So this act, the law, basically, although he was in favor of it at the beginning, by the end of his mandate, he realized that it was a big mistake. As he said here, it is not used by the people. It was used by journalists. So as if they are some kind of enemies. And he said that. Sorry, I have to find it here. So this is like saying to someone who is hitting you over the head with a stick, hey, try this instead, and then handing them a mallet. So basically, he was very, he regrets this law because it opened up the government and opened up the information for the journalists and for the general citizens. So he said he was naive and foolish. Basically, so I think this is very, very indicative for the access to information and freedom of information, because it shows us that how important this tool is. So the FOI law enabled journalists, NGOs, citizens, everyone to request the information, and it imposed the obligation to public authorities to provide the information and to publicize, to make certain groups of information available online on the internet. I have to say that before the introduction of Freedom of Information Act in year 2000, the UK government was considered to be one of the closest, one of the most obscure in the world. But now the UK is leading in general freedom of information, indices, measures, and stuff. So basically, they're very open. Especially in the US and in the UK, it is a really important tool for the media. But what happened actually is that the freedom of information has been gradually replaced by the open data as a new form of freedom of information 2.0, I would say. So the 21st century Freedom of Information Act. So while Freedom of Information Act basically emerged in 1966, when the United States adopted the first modern law on access to information. Someone said that it was Sweden in the 18th century, but this is something different. The thing is that it was introduced specifically as a tool for journalists to oversee the government. So it was not intended to be used by the general citizen primarily. It was a journalist's tool. It was a media law. But now it is, in many countries, it is a constitutional right. More than 100 countries have the freedom of information laws adopted, and citizens and media have the right to request the information. The thing is that with the IT development of the information technology from the 2000 something, the access to information as a media tool was was basically replaced by access to information as the obligation to proactively publish all kinds of information. There are some challenges of this law, and everybody is aware of that. So it has some restrictions, but they are not absolute in general. So every time someone requests information, the public authorities have to assess whether in the specific case some kind of restriction applies, such as privacy or confidentiality or similar. But the general, in many countries, especially in democratic countries, the presumption is that information is freely available unless there are strong reasons to restrict the access, but they have to be justified and real. So it's not just because we don't want you to know. So it's not enough. And of course, for journalists, especially nowadays, I mean, compare 1966 and now, 2 weeks or 3 weeks waiting for information, basically it's not an option. So it has real problems with time and expenses if you end up in court trying to force the government to give you information. So it's very expensive in most of European countries. In Croatia is basically cheap. You can do it whenever you want. So we have this broad access to the courts, and it's similar in the regional countries in the region. So in Serbia, Bosnia, Slovenia too. But now what we have is open data. So it's the change from this classical freedom of information, which is not basically suited for 21st century, towards open data, which is machine readable, mostly, but not always, but mostly in real time, available in real time. So as the change happens, you have the updated information, and it mostly contains, not always, but among other things, two large databases that the government is keeping. So it also emerged again in the United States in 2000. In the EU, EU followed very fast in 2003. But what is important is this G8 Open Data Charter, which was basically supported by President Barack Obama then, when most of the global leaders basically embraced and endorsed the principles of open data, so machine readable in real time and similar. Why is it important? It is important that it can be used for other purposes. So the data, which is machine readable, can easily be transformed in visualizations, in apps, in analysis, in research, and without any interference of human work. So the computers only basically do that. I mean, in a simple form, it's Excel table, which you can easily transform into the pie or graph or something. So it is very useful for journalists to present data, and of course to fight fake news and stuff, for startups, for researchers, and similar. I'm showing you here just some, I don't know, a micro percentage of information about open data. So these are open data portals all over the world. So for example, in Europe, we have 381 open data portals. And there are some examples where it can be used. For example, crime rates. So for example, for evidence-based policy, for research, for media analysis of certain policy decisions. So if you have access to official, practical, and correct data, then you can basically challenge the decisions. And of course, for example, in traffic, it's very wide use. So, but we all have data apps on our mobiles for maps and similar, which show us where to go. So they're all built on open data. But the main point here is what happened now in the crisis. So what happened here is, I mean, if we look at the access to information and open data altogether, we can say here that there are two basically sides of the issue of information and crisis. On one hand, the crisis posed the threats to citizens' rights altogether, everywhere. This is something that happened, and this is real. And of course, in democratic states, respond differently than the other states. But the thing is that in any crisis, the proportional restrictions of rights have to happen and are happening. If you cannot get out of your house, or you cannot go to work, or you have to close your shop, this is a restriction of rights. The issue here, and many constitutional courts now in Europe have been discussing that and deciding about that, is whether these restrictions were proportional. So it was not the issue whether we needed some kind of restrictions, but whether they were proportional, and whether they, the governments introduced the restrictions in the constitutional way. I mean, following the constitutionally and legally determined procedures. But what happened basically when it comes to the access to information is that many users were not able to receive information because of the delays. Of course, people were teleworking, not working from home. There are restrictions, for example, sessions of different bodies were not held live, but exchanging emails, for example, from exchanging emails to online sessions which are closed for the public. To restrictions of restrictions of the information related to pandemic. For example, one notable case in freedom of information community is the case where the UK government, okay, I said that they are very open, but not always, they restricted the access to information for journalists with regard to the membership of the scientific council of the government for the pandemic. So there was a council of scientists and people who know stuff, yeah, who were giving basically the advice to their coordinating body and to their government with regard to the measures they have to be taken. And the list was not, I mean, at the end, the list were available to the journalists, but with some names crossed, so they did, because people didn't want to, didn't want their names to be known publicly, that they were participating in the council. It's interesting to see why it happened, but now the case is in front of the commissioner of the UK, so they're still deciding on complaint. On the other hand, there were completely different examples, such as in, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro, where the governments basically made lists of people who have infection public, not just have infection, but who, for example, breached the measures of self-isolation, or who, I don't know, had some. There were some lists, of course. It's not just. I can't remember exactly what happened in Bosnia, which kind of list is that was, but it was published. So the names of the people were just put on the internet. Of course, there was a reaction of Data Protection Agency because the thing was that the governments there wanted the public to do their job, to watch on their neighbors, that people watch on their neighbors so they don't get out if they're infected. So that was the point of this publication. So this is another, the other side of the issue. But this is one thing. So whether the access information is restricted under the pandemic situation. But the thing is actually that access to information enables information to be, and open data, of course, even more, enables information to be available as a tool for fighting pandemic. So information here is crucial for crisis management. Of course, the communication too, but information as such, correct official information is crucial because it ensures compliance on one hand, and basically it lowers the incidence rate. So if all countries share the information about epidemiological information, for example, then you can fight pandemics. So if you, of course, sometimes it is used also for political purposes, but again, it is information that it is. Of course, in some countries there was a suspicion against the government information. For example, in Serbia, the NGOs and media were very, I would say, careful, and they basically asked for explanation why the numbers are like that. So they didn't believe that the information was punctual, correct. Of course, at the end, it showed that there was many information mismanagement in the process. I'm not talking about the eventually political, possible political manipulation. That's not my concern here now. The thing is also that with information you can control the government. As I mentioned, this council because it's very important to know that the measures the government is taking are grounded on the firm evidence, or at least, I mean, how firm it can be now with this half established truths about COVID. But the thing is, for example, for public procurement, also in Serbia, and this is a good example, they restricted the government restricted the access to information about the equipment, COVID equipment, so medical equipment, masks, and everything they bought for the country. They restricted information to the media, saying that it is confidential and that people do not have right to know how many of these they have. And of course, I think that is very important that without correct information, which is enabled by timely access to information and open data, you cannot fight fake news, and you cannot build trust between the public authorities and science on one hand. I think that they should go together, and the public, which is not an expert public, on the other hand. And of course, then we come to the importance of communicating information from the public authorities and from the media and other intermediaries who try to make information useful and easy to understand for the public. So here is also an issue. So here are the typical information which are now freely available for the public. I'm just saying that my point here is that before pandemic, there were very many problems with access to information, but it seems now that public authorities might be aware of the benefits the freely available and open information can give, not only to them, but their public policy goals in the society at large. So from crime rates, especially, for example, some collaterals of pandemics, so domestic violence, poverty rates, incidence of psychological mental illnesses, to, I don't know, taxes, spending, donations, procurement, and of course health system and epidemiological data. So here there are many visualizations and examples of use of this information. And what is very important, that even the countries that did not, basically they didn't care about open data, just jumped on this train and started to publish the information. Of course, there's a big role of, for example, in Europe, of European Center for Disease Control and for World Health Organizations, which required all health services to publish and to send them the information, basically through APIs and in real time, which is also important. So to finish, my conclusions here are that the increase of, that there is a significant increase of freely available information. We can say that this is a kind of open data leap. And I think this is a kind of a window of opportunity that happened, which will change the course of open data policies. And, but I think it's important to indicate benefits. I'm sure that many of you did not know that there is there is a directive, there is a legal obligation to publish data. Open data, and there is. But there are, of course, challenges, as the Serbian example showed. There is a problem of information management within the system. So how correct is the information, and what the IT is doing with this information, what are the experts are doing, because it needs the interdisciplinary approach. So if you are a doctor, you don't have to know what computer can do with your information. And of course, the IT don't have to know what kind of information you have. So basically, it needs an interdisciplinary approach to everything now. And of course, there's a demand side. So what information has been requested? This is basically a focus of our research, to see what kind of information has the media requested from different key institutions for the pandemic. What is to be hoped here is that the standard of open data will be kept alive even after the pandemic, or maybe for some other, I hope not, I'm hoping not, that will not happen, but you never know, for the future pandemics, which will be then easier to handle. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give floor to possible questions if you want to raise hand or something. I have a question on my own, but if you guys have questions, go ahead. Then I will start. I have a question with keeping the standards, because it really concerns me in several areas. It seems to me that during this crisis, wherever we established some really really nice criteria, even in the I don't know online administration provided by government, especially in Croatia. There were these digital licenses to move around, etc. And even on the university level, you could you could do everything by mail or by any digital platform. Now with the crisis not really finished, and as we are still in lots of peril now, everything in my opinion, that is also one of my hypotheses, everything is coming back with a vengeance. I mean, on the behalf of the paper bureaucracy. I mean, it's now like the people are, especially by bureaucratic offices, that they are actually playing that like there's nothing happened. That this last half of year didn't even happen. So, what do you think that will happen in this particular area of research and then bureaucracy?
Well, thank you, Domagoj, for the question. I mean, for observation that we see here the conflict between traditional paper bureaucracy and new online or digital government. I have to say that in some countries they have been doing a lot on developing the digital government. Some, as Croatia, did some things, but not enough. So one important thing is that in Croatia we did not introduce the paperless bureaucracy in terms of everyday communication and procedures. For example, in Slovenia, a few years ago, they already the government already introduced that all administrative procedures are happening online. There are no papers. So you receive the request from the citizen, for example, for driver's license or for a building permit, and you proceed online. In Croatia, of course, you still have, we just abolished the stamps. It was a big thing for us. So I think that that this situation might be a factor of acceleration towards digital government. So kind of a window of opportunity, and I hope so. I hope so, because I don't think that there's you can turn back. I mean, you cannot turn back the time and go to 1984 again.
Well, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. In my modest opinion, they're going to be launched back in time. Any more questions? Professor Kirsting?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anamarija, for this wonderful presentation. And you're 100% right. I mean, with the digitalization, it's much more than what we had with the Freedom of Information Act, and now with open data there are much more possibilities and much more chances, and not only for journalists. By the way, I mean, there are some projects I know from, I mean, not a journalist not focusing on journalism, but I know that nowadays even articles are written automatically by computers, and I doubt that will be the future of journalism. But anyway, there are some attempts to do that. But what we see in the public administration, and that is quite right, is that now they realize that there are a lot of what you said, a lot of chances and possibilities. And they realized this open data is a big benefit for local government, especially in the time of the corona. And when it comes to the sub-local level, not only at the national level, the regional level, but also the local level is becoming more important to fight this the pandemic. And I think that is a big possibility. And the same is here. I mean, not only Croatia has a lot of problems. We have some cities, or in this area, these are even provinces or Länder, like for example Hamburg, and Hamburg is very much in front of everything. And we had, in the course of the Freedom of Information Act, there was Berlin and the city of Bremen, but the other states and provinces were very much behind, and it's still the starting point. I mean, we see the benefits and the possibilities, and this is what I said, this kind of forced digitalization, what we now realize. Everything is becoming more and more digital. We see the benefits of it. So I think that open data is a big chance for what you said, for a lot of cities. This is more a comment than a question. So thank you very much for this wonderful presentation.
Well, this is nice, nicely put. Forced digitalization. Yeah, I agree, Norbert, with you. That's good. That's good term. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Professor Anamarija Musa. We are now moving towards our next presentation by.
I have a question.
Okay. Mariana has a question.
Not me, Nicola. I do, but I know that we're in a rush. Okay. But Nicola has.
No, we are not in a rush. We're in Dubrovnik. We're fine.
You.
I mean, it's not that important, but you mentioned Montenegro, where there was basically the names, the age, the address of people that were quarantined. So all quarantined people was published. So I'm not sure what your position on that is. I mean, because today, I mean, as we speak, those citizens are suing the government and expect to win on courts, probably just financial compensation. But I'm not sure what is your position on that? Open data, but again, partially breaking their rights. That's it.
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, of course. I think that in this particular case, it was not acceptable, because personal data are protected, especially when it comes to the health issues. So they are called sensitive data, sensitive personal data. So the thing was that there was no real public interest to disclose this information, because the results, the consequences could be also very negative, because especially, I mean, it's not, people maybe felt ashamed, they didn't want to know others that they're sick. This is some kind of personal thing people have to respect. Of course, there are some kind of ideas that this is a shaming and blaming thing. So if you put a list, as you put a list of people who didn't pay taxes, some are very important, but the list, usually in most countries you have a list of people who don't pay. This the instrument of forcing people to pay the taxes. So we will remove your name from the list if you pay. But here there's no point. The point is maybe that I know that my neighbor has to be quarantined and he's isolated, and I, for example, see her going out. This is the only thing, but this is not something that the citizens should do. We live in societies that has institutions, procedures, there are inspections, there are police, there is something else. It shouldn't be done by mob, by the public, by general community. So I think this is something this is not acceptable. And I think that the court, I mean, the European Commission warned Montenegro to overturn the decision. And as I know, the Agency for Data Protection, which in the first step allowed, that was the problem, they allowed the publication of data, but it was the only country in Europe that did that, or the first one, at least, they then overturned their own decision. So it's not acceptable.
Okay, thank you very much.